For our next step, we're going to be filtering off our crude aspirin. But in the step after that, we're going to need some boiling hot water. So before we do our filtering step, let's set up some distilled water in a 150 milliliter beaker. Now this this is probably about 100 milliliters of water. I'm only going to need 60, but just get this boiling. You don't need an exact amount yet. So we're going to let this come to a boil while we are filtering off our aspirin. So here I have my Erlenmeyer flask with my crude aspirin in it, in this little mixed solution. And I can see it's very cold, and I've got a lot of aspirin in here. In order to filter it, we're going to be using a Buchner funnel. So I've got the Buchner funnel set up here, along with a Buchner flask. I've got this set up to an aspirator, which when I turn on the water, it will allow a pressure to be pulled through here, creating a vacuum inside this flask, pulling all of my water through, and allowing me to dry out my aspirin. So what I need to do is set this up. I need my Buchner funnel and flask, I need my aspirator here, and I need to get some filter paper. This filter paper will fit right into the Buchner funnel. So I've got my funnel set up here and ready to go. I'm just going to place my filter paper inside of it. I'm going to wet the filter paper a little bit and turn on the water so that it pulls it down nice and tight, forming a seal. So first I turn on my water. I want to get a pretty good stream going. Then I'm just going to spray this with a spray bottle. So it should pull it all down. And then I take my funnel that has my aspirin in it, and I'm just going to pour this directly in. And it's going to pull the water through. And I can see I've still got quite a bit left in here. So I'm going to go ahead and use a stir bar and my squirt bottle to get that out of there. Then we just want to leave our water running for a little bit to try and pull as much of that fluid through as possible. So we can see that I've got quite a bit of aspirin in my Buchner funnel here. So my next step is I need to do a recrystallization, because I can see I've got a lot of white powder here, but I've got this weird brown stuff. And when I do a recrystallization, what I'm going to be able to do is I'm going to be able to use a solvent that's going to pull all of this discoloration away and leave me with pure white crystals. So I need to do that using a mixture of ethanol and boiling water. So let's take a look at our next step. For this step, there are a few things that I'm going to need. First off, I need my crude aspirin in my Buchner funnel. I need one of my 150 milliliter beakers. I need my other 10 milliliter graduated cylinder. And I need my 50 milliliter graduated cylinder for my distilled water. I also have my distilled water coming to a boil here, so that should be hot enough. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to just take my spoon here, and I'm going to pull this all out. I'm going to pull out this filter paper and scrape off this aspirin into this 150 milliliter beaker. Just want to get as much of it out as I can, being careful not to spill any. Alright, and I'm being very careful as I scrape this so that I don't break up the filter paper. Because now what I want to do is I want to get that filter paper out of there. So there we go. There's the filter paper. And scrape whatever's left over out onto that. For this next step, I'm going to need to be wearing some gloves, so I'm going to go put those on. All right, I've got my gloves on, and what I want to do is I want to take this filter paper and I want to get all of this aspirin off of it. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to use some ethanol as a solvent. So I've got my ethanol right here, and I need to get about 5 milliliters into this graduated cylinder. So once again, I'm going to be using a pipette to do that. Now I want to use just a little bit because ethanol is very good at dissolving aspirin. So if I use too much, it's just going to lower my yield. So I've got just about 5 milliliters. And so I'm going to take up my filter paper. And I'm just going to pour this down on it, just a little bit at a time. Turn around. Okay, and that should be as much as I can get out of there. So now I'm just going to really stir this up to try and get as much of that dissolved as I can before adding any water. This might take you a few minutes. Alright, that took me about 3 minutes or so of stirring, but I was able to get all of it dissolved. So, all of my aspirin is now dissolved in this, and so I need to measure out 60 milliliters of my boiling hot water. Now this is a situation where it's going to be okay if it's not exact, because I am pouring boiling water, so we're going to need to be safe here. So pour that in. There's 50 milliliters. So I'm going to take that 50 and I'm going to pour that into my beaker. I'm just going to add another 10 milliliters. Now that should be good. So when I do this step, what I'm really allowing to happen is the aspirin and all of the other impurities that are in it to dissolve in the ethanol and the water. And what I'll start to get as this cools down is I'll have pure aspirin precipitating out of this. So now my final step is going to be to cool this down again. So I need to put this back into my ice bath or my fridge or whatever we're using to keep it nice and cold. So we want to get this back down to as low of a temperature as possible, and then we're going to filter it one last time. All right, we're ready for our last step. We've got a beaker filled with our pure aspirin now, and we just need to get the water out of it. So in this last step, we're actually going to be measuring the amount of aspirin that we have. So the first thing that we need to do is get ready to measure that. So we're going to be putting it back through that same Buchner funnel. You may want to rinse that out a little bit. But when we weigh this, when we weigh our final product, we're going to be weighing it on the filter paper. So we're going to need to subtract the weight of that. So before we do anything else, we need to weigh our filter paper. So first we need to reset our scale. We put our filter paper on top of it. And it's about 0.3 grams. So we're going to write that down. We're going to write down that we have 0.3 grams for our filter paper. Next, just like we did before, we're going to put our filter paper in our Buchner funnel, get everything ready. We're going to start our water. And then we're going to rinse it down a little bit. So now our filter should hold nice and tight, and we can pour the contents of our beaker through. We've got a little bit left in there, so we'll just use the wash bottle to get it out. So then we're just going to let this go until it all pulls through. I have almost all of my water pulled through, so you may not be able to see this, but I have a pretty decent layer of aspirin sitting here. However, I want this to dry a little bit, so I'm going to let it continue pulling a vacuum just to dry that out a little bit before I do anything else. All of my water has been pulled through. This is as dry as I'm going to get it. So now the final thing I need to do is just take this out of the Buchner funnel. I'm going to put it on a watch glass. I'm going to put it in the drying oven overnight, and then I can weigh it for my final weight. So take my Buchner funnel off. I'm just going to take some tongs. I'm just going to use that to grab the filter, lift it gently out, and place it on my watch glass. Okay. Okay. So you can see I've got a lot of aspirin here. Lots and lots of aspirin. So I'm going to place this in the drying oven overnight. With our scale set to 0, let's place our aspirin and our filter paper onto the scale. Take our weight that we get here, this 1.5 grams, subtract the weight of our filter paper from it, and we will have our final aspirin yield.